Hey there, and welcome to Work Dope, a podcast on the messiness and the potential of humans at work. I'm Linda Stacy, and I'm a corporate sellout who likes to think of herself as a corporate innovator, and I think that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck, even though it often does. By some statistics, up to 80% of the workforce are dissatisfied with work. And the paradox here is that we're more and more expecting to define ourselves and create our identity and meaning through our work. The pandemic and the Great Resignation, and now we move into the Great Regret and quiet quitting. All of these themes have forced us to take a look at what quality of life means and what culture really looks like for people inside of organizations. In fact, I think that business is cool. I think that building things and solving real world problems and creating, these are all fundamental to the best parts of what it means to be human. This is how we embrace, or at least one of the ways we embrace, human potential. In this episode, I'm chatting with Andrea Wenburg. Andrea hosts the Voice of Influence podcast and is the author of Unfrozen, Stop Holding Back and Release the Real You. Andrea works with clients to help them discover and develop their voice of influence and helps them apply it in the real world. Andrea combines a background in business, counseling ministries, and vocal music to tackle communication problems and release human potential. In this episode, we get at things like what it means really to be heard in the workplace. How does this manifest? What does it feel like? What actually happens? We talk about a couple of egregious situations at work and how to handle them. We talk about the fact that leadership actually means relationships. We talk about agency and knowing that what we do and say matters and that our points of view, no matter who we are, where we are in an organization, is important. There's so much in this episode. I hope you enjoy it and stay on to hear the outro so that I can share a couple of extra points to help to unpack a little bit more some of the themes that come up in the conversation. I hope you enjoy the episode. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm very well. Thank you for doing this today. The first thing I want to ask about is around your background in general and your quote unquote career history. You just told me that you don't have much of the formal corporate background, right? But basically, I'm looking for inflection points, and especially as the path leads to where you are today.
Key inflection points, I'd say, probably started when I was a kid and did a lot of singing in church, singing for school. And that was kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to make a difference with my voice. Because I knew that when I got up and I sang, people would tell me, you could see it in their face that something was lighting up. And then they would tell me afterwards, oh, that was such a beautiful song. That meant so much to me. And sometimes they would tell me why. And so I started from a very early age knowing that my voice mattered and that I wanted it to matter. So as I kind of went through school, and I ended up in music education, taught music for a little while. And when I was doing that, it was also about helping these kids find their voices, not just find it, but then develop it. There was always something more that we could do. There was always something more we could do to make it matter even more for the audience, for the music, that sort of thing. And then later on, after I got married, I ended up going back to school. I had a choice. I could either pursue a path that led toward being a graduate assistant for a really renowned composer, a conductor, choir conductor, and I could do that with my life, or I could go toward my curiosity, move toward my curiosity, where I had all of these existential questions, theological questions in my mind that I was just like really wrestling with, trying to understand my place in the world. And when I came up against the options, I chose to follow my curiosity. And I went to seminary, went in with all these questions, expecting to find the answers, and came out more comfortable with the questions. Realizing that I didn't have to be right about everything in order to be valued and accepted. Then eventually I became a mom, was a stay-at-home mom, leading small groups. I worked with college students for a while, college women for quite a while, and then other moms. And then got to a point where I was really feeling frustrated and like, there's something more I'm supposed to be doing. Just this sense of like, there's something more. I don't know what it is. And I also had struggled with some things personally, postpartum depression and that struggle with identity that I think a lot of young moms have, trying to figure out their place, still trying to figure out my place. And then went to the movie Frozen, totally related to the character Elsa, in particular to how she was afraid of her own power and how love conquering fear helped her to gain control over those powers so that she could use them in a loving way instead of in a way that could be destructive toward others for herself. And so I ended up writing a book about my own experience, inspired kind of by going to that movie and unfrozen, stop holding back and release the real you. And from there started a podcast and a business about voice, still this common thread throughout that knowing that people's voices mattered and that our human experience needs to incorporate, and the voice has to be part of the human experience and how we influence one another, the kind of influence that we can have on each other, whether or not we actually change. I see a common thread with voice and whether or not people believe that what they do and say matters. So that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing what matters can be so challenging. And I have found that a lot of people, sometimes they can't even define it for themselves, and yet they know they want to be heard. There's a lot of complexity here in terms of what it means to be heard. Do you have either a personal response to that, or maybe a message that you share around what it means to be heard?
I do. One of the examples that I use is that of, imagine being a junior high kid coming into the lunchroom. You got your tray, you're looking around. Where do I sit down? What table do I sit down at? And, we all want to have a seat at the table. Having a seat at the table is nice. And so if somebody says, come on over, this seat is for you. That's such a relief because there's belonging. But you can sit down at that table and feel like you belong at the table without being able to share and have any kind of impact on the conversation. So I think the other thing that people want, they don't just want belonging, they want to have impact. And so to have a seat at the table, in my mind, is both belonging and your voice is heard. Not that you necessarily get what you want or that the things go your way, but your voice is a part of the conversation that ends up leading toward some outcome that hopefully you feel good about.
Do you come across folks in your work that are challenged to articulate? I have the impression that you're working predominantly with leaders, and sometimes I assume that a leader comes with that skill, but we know that that's not necessarily true. And any human being can always be working on their communication skill and their ability to influence the impact. And I'm trying to help folks, or I'm thinking about folks, I'm hoping I'm helping them on the front lines with ways that they can develop these skills. And that is part of your work. Yeah. What would you say to someone who might actually be on the introverted side of the scale, or even shy, or, whatever those terms are that keep you from opening your mouth or is causing the hesitation? How do people work through that? I know it's big. I know it's a challenge.
Yeah, sure. I definitely think that introverts have to be able to, first of all, articulate to the person who's facilitating the conversation, the leader, whatever, that they need the time to process after the initial conversation and that they will come back with their response later. I think it's not just introverts that need that. I think anybody that's super introspective, even an extrovert, could just blurt out an answer, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one or the one that they really want to say.
Right.
So I think from the leadership side of things, I think leaders have to recognize that not everything can happen in the moment, and they need to understand that this is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
And for the person who is responding, or the direct reports, whatever you want to, however you want to classify that person, that they can communicate that they need that time, that extra time. I think that's the first, like one of the main things.
Yeah.
There's certainly other things, but that's certainly.
Yeah. We need time to marinate. You're right. It's not necessarily the introvert extrovert thing here can influence it, but I'm just amazed at what can happen after a few hours or after a day. And every time I have even one of these conversations on the podcast, things that occur to me later, and it is how our brain works. Right now, we're using certain part of our brain, and then later when we can relax a little bit, there's other things that start coming into play. And I've talked about that on another podcast. So leaders acknowledge that you're starting a conversation and it's going to take time. And if you're the direct report, to articulate that, can we revisit this? Can we talk about it in a few days again? And we'll both be at a different place at that point. Some work environments seems that things move so quickly that it can be a challenge, I think, that anyone feels like they have any time for these things.
Well, I think a leader has to be realistic about the time frame for sure. So don't bring it up last minute if you need that answer immediately. I mean, or you can let them know that happens every once in a while. But I mean, if you can put a time and date stamp on it, this is going to end here. So you really that kind of puts a little bit of, responsibility onto that person who needs to process. Okay, I need to figure this out, what I want to say by this point. I think that's helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if it is later in the day.
Yeah. Just be kind. Yeah, absolutely. Shifting a little bit, as I mentioned before, I do like to ask folks if they're aware of egregious experiences in the workplace or other places in life. And I will give the example that I give sometimes from when I was younger. And there's a little bit of language in this. So sometimes there's cursing on the podcast and I announce it to people in the intro. But I was fairly early on in the career, and I've said this story before, but basically I found something that my boss wasn't able to find. This is all information retrieval. I'm a librarian by trade, and it came out in a conversation in a very awkward way, and that I had found the information, and she basically didn't look very good in the moment. And everyone involved tried to save face, but it still did not go well. So when it was just she and I in a room together at the end of this, she said, quit fucking showing me up, Blowers, or I'll can your ass. So Blowers was my maiden name. And she did have a sense of humor. She was very quick-witted, but this was not a jokey time. This was not at all. And I was 27, 28, massive student debt. I was finally had benefits, like medical benefits. It wasn't like I was just going to go back and get more waiting tables jobs. You know what I mean? It was like, for me, that didn't feel like an option. So that's one thing I like to present to people. Like, is there anything to do in that moment? Do you have a direct response to being spoken to that way?
I think you have to weigh what's worth it to you. Like, is it worth it to you to speak up, or is it better for you? And is it a consistent situation where it's toxic and you just should stay safe and let her say what she's going to say and then maneuver your way out?
Yeah.
But if you felt like you wanted to say something, I personally would start with so you feel like I was trying to show you up? And just let her respond. Yeah. Because then she has to own that statement. And then it gives you an opportunity to say, I didn't intend to do that. I apologize if that is how it came off. And how would you like me to handle that next time? Yeah. I mean, right. But sometimes it's not worth it.
Yeah. And I think in the end, that may have been how I felt. But going back to what we were just saying about time, I never would have been able to do that in the moment. But say I had someone that I could have counseled with that night, and they gave me the advice that you just did. Perhaps I could have had the courage to go in there and maybe use some of the Brene Brown language around the story I'm telling myself is that you feel that I was showing you up, or whatever that is, that you maybe embedded in that language. But I am aware of the fact that there are still things that should not be being said in corporate work environments. And also there's also all sorts of other kind of work environments that are less official, less harassment policy oriented, and giving folks language around this, I think is really helpful. Did you have one that you wanted to share also, kind of something on the egregious side and behavior?
Sure. Yeah, I think when I was being trained and getting training and trying to establish myself as somebody who is hopefully good at leading people through a conversation that would be transformative. And so counseling ministries was my master's degree. It was in a small group. And one time I led a small group session, and my colleague then after I did that, she actually called me out of the blue and just ripped into me that everything that I had done in that session was bad. And she just like went through this big, huge list, and she was upset. Like it was emotionally charged too. And so there was no sense of like camaraderie or like, I think we need to talk about this, nothing like that. It was just, she was angry. Yeah. She was not happy with what I did. And I'm not even looking back, I'm not really sure why it mattered that much. It was a stylistic kind of situation, I don't know. It was a choice that I made for a certain reason. And she didn't necessarily care or want to know about that. I think it seemed like there was other pent up stuff going on that maybe it would all just sort of came out here.
Right.
So yeah, that was one situation. And really what it did is it made me feel just totally crushed. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not good at what I thought I was good at. I have no future in this environment. Why am I bothering with this education? Everything really, and there were some other things going on in my life at the time too, that caused me to kind of question all that. But ultimately it felt destructive. It didn't feel constructive at all.
Yeah. So key learnings from that.
Yeah.
I mean, how did that relationship progress? Was that it? Was it done after that, or what? I mean,
we made it through whatever the end of the year was, I think, but I definitely didn't feel safe around her anymore. I didn't feel like I wanted to talk in the group anymore, like things like that, when you feel attacked like that, you just sort of take care of yourself and back off.
Yeah. You said safety, and I believe that's one of the things that you do focus on. I think I heard you even speak about safety once on a stage for a brief period. That was a short talk that I heard you give. And it's so important. And when a person isn't feeling safe, I mean, you just described it, right? You did not feel safe because of the way that the reaction came towards you, like her reaction, which certainly had a lot of other stuff in it. It wasn't just you that led to that moment. Just, the way to push through in that. I think it happens a lot. And I think in corporate environments, we might work closely with a handful of people and then more broadly with larger teams. And there's, I think, always going to be a few people in that group that you don't feel safe with, and what do you do? And I don't know if you have a sense of this, but I feel like some people are a little bit more numb, or like, I think I feel everyone's aggression and reactivity, but I think other people are a little less affected by it. They, either they don't sense it, their spidey senses are different, perhaps. Other things that you would say to people who are having to navigate through it.
So I think you brought up a really great point. You and I have talked about sensitivity before. Emotional sensitivity. And actually emotional sensitivity is probably rooted in neurological sensitivities. I do think that some people are more apt to soak things up like a sponge, and then other people have more of a barrier on the outside, like you were talking about. And how do people who are more sensitive just go through the world, just make it through?
Right.
And it is tough, because there's so much that they have to offer. And there's so much insight that they gain by being empathetic, sensitive, intuitive. And I think that it's easy to lose that if those people don't feel safe and don't feel like they can bring things up when they need to.
Right.
How does that person handle that? I guess when I think of that person, which I think I am kind of like that, I have thought a lot about the buffer that I need in order to be able to handle criticism. So, or to be able to handle life in general.
Yeah.
And that buffer for me has to do with sleep,
Oh yeah.
hormones.
Absolutely.
I mean, all these like physical things.
Yep.
But not feeling overwhelmed. Okay. So as soon as I start to feel overwhelmed, what do I need to do about that? Just taking care of myself so that I can move through the world with a sense of personal safety.
Yeah.
Knowing that, you're going to get hurt,
right,
but you're going to be okay.
Right.
And if I can go through the world like that, then I think I'm able to still have impact even when things get a little dicey.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The sensitivity is a superpower, and it also can be a source of major drain if it's not handled well. And I found extreme, I don't know if that's really the word, but extreme preparation is important. So part of that is the biological things that you just mentioned, but also knowing that I've done my part. I've shown up and I've contributed. And if something doesn't go well and there's time for feedback or criticism or whatever, that I can take the bits of it that will improve the situation and not associate it with, this isn't bashing Linda necessarily. And if they are bashing Linda, that is a separate thing. And it probably has more to do with them than it does with me. And not everyone's going to be my friend.
That's right. Oh my gosh, that's a hard one to swallow for those of us who really care about that.
Yeah. And I actually had a couple of relational therapists on the show, on the podcast. It is a show. Yeah. And they talked we talked about this too. And we did come to that, we're not going to have this type of awesome relationship like that. Sometimes we feel like that's the expectation, especially if we had a tough time in our younger years with fitting in. One thing I like to ask folks sometimes, if you're at a cocktail party, Andrea, what do you tell people you do when you're at a cocktail party? If they're interested, like if they're really interested, you're not giving them the one-liner, maybe you're giving them a little bit more than the one-liner.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I probably say something like, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they're wanting to develop their leaders as they're coming up, and knowing that they have future potential for growing into the company. Well, one of the things that we do is we work as the vendor for their leadership development program in Omaha, and we provide leadership training and coaching and giving these people an opportunity to grow so that they can make a real difference in their teams now and in the future. I mean, I would just probably start with just an example at a cocktail party.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. And so you're turning young folk into thriving leaders. That's kind of the mission here. Is that right?
So in that example, certainly, but also what we really do is we do leadership development, organizational development. Mm-hmm. When leaders have a strategic initiative that they want to roll out, how do they get buy-in at every level? Mm-hmm. Well, you got to start at the beginning of the initiative to design it, to think about the communication, to think about how it's going to impact everybody. We can come in and support them through that process, help them bring that outside perspective and understanding of human dynamics, dynamics of influence, to know how to proceed and how to bring people in on it as they go. So that it's actually successful in the end.
Right. And one topic I've been curious about lately, another itch that I'm scratching, is what it means to be a leader who's a mentor coach, and how that contrasts from other types of leaders, and filling in for that other type. I mean, that could be a couple of different things. Some people refer to it as kind of like a patriarchal system, or the hierarchy and order of command and that type of thing. And for you, how does leader as mentor coach translate?
So are you talking about people who want to be that, and so they're bringing that to their work? Or are you talking about like a system that wants those leaders to also be mentors or coaches?
I think all aspects of it. I'm interested in uncovering this movement. And I think some companies and individuals are far along into this and others are not. So it's just kind of like picking apart what the elements are and in brass tacks in terms of a leader who's very, you're going to do this because I've mandated it, or leaders potentially who don't really want to answer questions or that aren't really indicating that they care. So what does it actually mean? What are the skills, the characteristics of a leader who is coaching their direct reports to better work?
I love the topic. We've done some research. We've done some research in interviewing so many people over the years, and then in particular, like experts and leaders in companies and even employees, looking at what motivates people, bringing in the psychology aspect of things. And the perspective that I bring, I don't think it's the full perspective, but the perspective that I bring, I believe, is that people really do want, especially now, and they're more likely to ask for it now, is agency at work, knowing that what they do and say matters. So to me, that's their voice, what they do and say. If I'm a leader or a mentor coach, and I want to have an impact on somebody else, I believe that healthy influence is mutual. So I don't just enact my influence on somebody else, but I take in influence from them as well. I'm not a bowling ball that's hitting a balloon. It's more like a couple of volleyballs that are pressing up against each other. There's movement, there's back and forth. There's accepting that you have something to offer me. You're a human being.
Right.
You have perspective.
Right.
You have insights that I don't have. It might be as simple as I'm willing to let you encourage me. Take that in and actually have that impact me, and then tell you, thank you for making a difference in my day to day. You know, like it could be as simple as that. So to me, number one, the main thing here is whether or not you really want the other person to have a voice of influence. Are you going to both be a voice of influence? Because if that's the case, then I think that you both have agency and you're coming to agreement on the right things about our roles, about our responsibilities, our priorities, and the plan that we're going to put in place. We're working together to do those things instead of one person having all the answers and coming in as the hero and saving the day.
I love that. So it's a collaboration, it's a back and forth, it's a mutual influence and openness to that. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think if you are someone who's an individual contributor and a direct report, and you're seeking that openly, honestly, and you're not getting it in your environment, I just wonder if it's just a good indication that it might not be the place for you. If you're not going to be able to grow and contribute, and this feels like a baseline litmus test, if there's just never the option. I love the analogy of, the volley, the back and forth. I am also very big on the idea that self-leadership is a huge component. I want anyone, no matter where they are in an organization, to be leading themselves first and foremost. Would you suggest that any type of program that you're designing, any type of work that you're doing, is really applicable to anyone in the organization?
I absolutely think so. Yes, I do. I think, yeah, definitely. Self-leadership, like you were mentioning, that is something that, of course, anybody can care about and improve in. And then just interacting with other people, the kind of influence that you want to have. Anybody can be a voice of influence. So, what kind of impact do you want to have on a situation? Understanding yourself to know what you bring to the table, understanding yourself to know what your perspective is, what's your point of view, and why does that point of view matter in this situation? Because you don't have to have everybody else's point of view. We were talking before that I'm a corporate outsider, and yet I'm working in a corporate, and my business works in a corporate space. I have to acknowledge that and own that instead of trying to cover it up and be something that I'm not.
Right.
because then I can actually bring that to the table and say, actually, there's some things that we can help you benefit from this perspective.
Absolutely.
So I think that when a person comes to the table, knowing what their point of view is, understanding themselves well enough to know what they have to say,
right,
and being willing to offer their perspective. This is the tough part.
Yeah.
Without expectation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That's
have
huge.
to care enough about you and this situation that I'm willing to offer this perspective, even if it means that you're going to
not receive it or
not receive it. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to reject me or.
Right. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't open your mouth. I think that's the key. It's, yeah, I see this a lot. You just made me think about, I had someone on the show was talking about bringing your whole self to work and how he comes from a very non-traditional background and he's in a bank. And he has no problem saying, guys, bring this down to like 4th grade level here. I do not have the same education that you do. And it benefits. And I found myself being more that I am just owning what I don't know. I know a host of things, but there's a ton of things I don't know. And let's just be okay with that, everyone. I think I'm also in environments sometimes where there's a lot of bravado and it's irritating, but I love the fact that I'm moving past it and that it's like, have your bravado. I'm going to bring honesty and the fact that I don't know everything to the table.
It's so interesting how much more receptive people are, I think, to that honesty.
Yeah.
If you are confident in the other things that you can bring to the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that needs to be built. I think that you definitely need some time to, I don't feel like people enter the workforce necessarily with all of that. There takes time, it takes time to build some sense of confidence in what you do bring. And I will say that if there's too much bravado or whatever those other shields or masks, it makes it really difficult to learn when you're like so wrapped up in whatever you're trying to put forth. So that would be my little PSA you got to let your guard down in order to really be open to learning from the people around you at the table.
Oh man, I agree. We were talking about that person coming in to save the day. If your boss is somebody who just comes in and saves the day all the time and has all the answers, where do you think you fall? If you agree with them and you go with it,
right?
And especially if there's somebody that's really dynamic and you just go with it, you end up being in agreement, but you end up with less agency.
Yeah.
Because it's not your perspective that you're bringing, you're kind of falling in line, which is not always bad.
Right.
But it can be dangerous.
Yeah. When you're always falling in line, or that's what the position feels like, there's just no growth there. I mean, it's a very frustrating place to be. It's stymied. You become very numb, and it's the opposite of an engaged workforce if you want your folks to fall in line all the time. I can't imagine that's what people want in their workforce. I wanted to go back to safety for a moment because I would think that maybe there are some leaders that don't realize that they're creating unsafe feeling spaces. Like,
oh yeah.
Are there like little things that people in leadership or people who want to move into that space, who want to be more influential, how can they demonstrate that they're safe, that they are safe to be around?
Oh gosh. First of all, it's really great if they are asking the question in the first place, because that just admits that you might not be right about everything, which is a hard thing for a lot of people to just accept. But once they get through that, then I think then you have to start to ask the question and find out, are people feeling safe around me? When are they not? Why are they not? And how do you know? I think one of the easiest ways to know is whether or not you ever hear complaints or concerns. If you never hear complaints and concerns, people do not feel safe around you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't assume that, everything's just fine in that case.
Yeah.
It's fine for you because you can just go through life and not have to worry about all those complaints and concerns because nobody has the guts to say anything to you. Even if you provide an opportunity for people to use their voices, for their voices to matter, even if you provide a meeting once a month and you're like, this is where we can talk about X, Y, and Z. This is where you can bring up your questions and your concerns. If nobody ever does that, then clearly they don't feel safe in that environment. It's not an actual opportunity.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
put forth a meeting, but that doesn't mean it's an opportunity because they don't feel safe. So how can they improve that? I think becoming aware, like I said, starting to think about and find out what are the things that I'm doing that are making people feel unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
the way that I'm talking to them,
Mm-hmm.
how is that making them feel unsafe?
Right.
When it comes down to it, we have a method that we call the deep impact method. And the whole point of this method is based on the idea that people are going to open themselves up to criticism and course correction
Yeah.
when they feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
they feel significant,
Mm.
and then you bring the challenge.
Mm.
Safe, significant, and challenge. This is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm for you, if I explain to you how you matter,
Mm-hmm.
you can see that I'm for you.
Mm-hmm.
I want good things for you. You matter. This is how I see you matter. And then you bring in a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a colleague of mine back in the day, when she ripped into me, if she would have said to me,
right.
Like, I'm for you, like we're together in this.
Right.
I really believe in what you do and what you can do and what you're going to do. And this is the difference that you've already made in our group.
Yeah.
I do have a thought for you on the way that we approached the last conversation or whatever.
Yeah. Right.
Whoa, I would have been way more open to growth.
Yeah.
Instead, she was just trying to shut me down.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's occurring to me. So I have a couple of direct reports and have regular one-on-ones. And I think that's a fantastic opportunity to reinforce the first two parts that you were saying, right? Like that there's this regular thread of support and how can I help you? And then when there is a challenge, maybe the foundation is there, the garden's ready for it or whatever, people should really take advantage of those regular touch points to the extent that they're offered. And if they're not offered as an individual contributor, ask for them, ask for support, ask for what you need in life. That is important. And they can be little tiny asks and they can help to build. Tell me again what they are. You said 3 parts. Safe.
They're safe. So I'm for you.
I'm for you. Yes.
Significant. I respect you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I respect you. And then challenged is I believe in you.
Right.
That's the reason why I'm challenging you. I'm calling you to step into more of who you are or to step into this better version of what you're doing instead of I'm putting you in your place.
Right. I know that when this isn't happening, well, for one thing, a lot of bosses and leaders don't get any training. We need to acknowledge that.
Right.
But there's also a lot of fear on the part of managers and bosses where if they lack confidence, that they're really going to have a hard time feeling that they can empower their people. They don't want their people to embarrass them. That there's all these other things that can happen when a manager is not well supported, whether they're attempting to improve their skills or
Absolutely.
Human fear is just a major component of all of this. We can't deny it, but man, a lot of people are in denial. I think.
Yeah, sure. Linda, direct reports don't realize how important those 3 components are for you confronting your supervisor.
Yeah.
Those people are people too.
Yes. Oh, good point.
And if you really want them to change, if you want to have a deep impact on the whatever it is that you're concerned about, then you take the step back and you go through this process too. You figure out how you can communicate.
Right.
I'm for you.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
This is a safe place. I'm not just trying to put you in your place. I'm not just trying to threaten you.
Yeah.
I believe in you. Whatever.
Right. Yeah. No,
that
so
makes
true.
a huge difference.
So true. I think acknowledging, even prefacing a quick text or email or IM, I know you've got a ton on your plate. I mean, just like that type of, you're acknowledging their experience. And yes, I think that earns direct reports so much. And it's not brown nosing, it's acknowledging their human experience in this work organization. And I think some folks who feel so depleted and as though they never get that themselves, they're very hesitant to put it out first. But I always go back to, and you may have known it too from singing religious-y background, Peace Begins With Me. Was that a song that you sang? Let Peace Begin With Me. I got
Let
the
there be
message.
peace on
Yes,
earth.
that's it. That's it. You
Yeah,
know, I
yeah.
got the message from a very early age, and it made intuitive sense to me that, you know, it's a good place to start, right? Start
Yes.
demonstrating respect. How do you demonstrate respect? How do you show your boss I mean, I do think that you can respect any human being. This is making a choice to kind of walk in compassion, but now we're getting to other things. But it's complex, and I think it
It's
would serve
related
anyone. Yeah.
and nuanced. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very, very, very nuanced. And then we've touched on this a few times in this conversation, but to you personally, I'm curious, when do you feel most valued in the work that you're doing now?
Mm.
And then, like, more broadly, what does it mean to be valued? People say it all the time. I want to be valued in my work. And then my next question is articulate that. And I'm not quite sure that they can put it into words. And I think it might help to put some language around it so that when it happens, you're aware of it.
In my work,
Yes.
value is an interesting question.
Yeah.
You know, am I worried about how other people value me? Should it impact me personally, or should it just be an indicator of whether or not I'm on the right path? And if I need to make a course correction, there's lots of interesting things to talk about with value. But from what I understand what you're saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Just this sense of feeling like it matters is the main thing that I want to know in my work. When people share with me that they have changed, that something inside of them has transformed. And so now they're doing something differently. They're living their life. They're approaching their relationships differently. And that's what I believe leadership is relationships anyway. So if that kind of thing happens and I get that kind of feedback, it certainly means a lot to me. More broadly, what immediately comes to mind is my teenagers. And I think one of the things I've been dealing with lately is I'm doing a lot of driving them around. And I'm not always getting a thanks, Mom. And I'm not always getting so this is what happened at school today. I'm getting the silent treatment.
Yeah. Right.
Not always, but sometimes. And I tell you, when there's that lack of connection, that's when it feels like disjointed and like I'm not being valued. I think that that's probably something that I personally really care about, is that there's some sort of connection, that there's some sort of lived, shared experience that we are able to connect over and feel good about. And then I feel more valued in that scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's huge. I love this. So the connection is key. And I would venture to guess that that's part of it for anyone that I've asked this, even though it hasn't been said in those words, that the lack of connection. And I'm just thinking, like, again, from the direct reports experience, how do you foster connection if you're feeling out there and unsupported or feeling like you're not being valued? How can you ensure that you're doing your part to feel connected in an environment? Because sometimes I feel like people just kind of like, whatever, you know, if they're not going to X, Y, and Z, then I'm just going to phone it in. Is that what people say? I'm just going to collect the paycheck, do the bare minimum. It's not a very good experience. A shared experiences, I think most people would agree, are better than lone ones.
One of the things that we found when talking to people who are doing organizational development in their large companies and doing their own research within their own companies with engagement and whatnot, we're hearing people want human connection. Yeah. They long for it. They need it. Yeah. Whether it's an in-person, hybrid, or remote work environment, it's easy to feel disconnected right now, because I think a lot of us are trying to protect ourselves. So I still would go back to what we were talking about before. I feel like, gosh, if each one of us would take care of ourselves and determine to be safe, I am safe. Like, I'm going to be okay. Even if I get attacked, I'm going to be okay. Even if X, Y, and Z happens, I'm still going to put myself out there. I'm still going to make a difference in the world because it matters. I think that makes a difference in how much we can really connect with other people.
Yeah. Right. This is at odds a little bit, because we're protecting some elements of ourselves, but we're also aware of this need to connect. And sometimes overprotection is fear. That we end up projecting things that repel people. So we're so dynamic as human beings.
It's so true.
Yeah. Some basics I really feel are making eye contact and the willingness to smile at someone. It feels Pollyanna. It's important because each
The
human
basic
being,
acknowledgement of
yes,
another human being.
right,
Oh,
right,
I mean,
right.
how's your
And
family?
exactly. And even if, sometimes you might not get anything back.
Yeah.
And it could be a situation like teenagers and whatever they're going through, and they don't want to give their mom like any sense of acknowledgement. That's a little bit different. But I think sometimes in a work environment, people can be quite distracted. Other things are going
Yeah.
on. And it's a moment to say 18 other things are going on for that person. I'm acknowledging myself when I acknowledge them. Namaste. The God in me acknowledges
It's
the God
not
in
all
you.
about me.
Exactly. All of those things. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. This has been really rich. I look forward to listening to this back and pulling out the cherries, the nuggets. Yeah, we are so dynamic as human beings. And I want everyone to be safe in their work
Yeah.
environments and really be able to
Yeah.
contribute and to grow and to make businesses cool and do important things. And
Yeah. Here's the thing. It's always going to be messy.
yeah.
So we have to develop some of our own resilience,
Yes.
some of our own sense of personal safety
Yes.
in order to be able to keep going through that mess. And if we can acknowledge the mess, if we can be okay with wading through a little bit of that, we're going to make it.
Yeah.
We'll come out okay on the other side. And we can choose to not work where we're working now if it's bad.
Right.
I do think that there's something to that as well.
Yeah. And the mess is there on purpose. Like that's where all the growth comes from. I mean, businesses wouldn't even exist unless there was a problem to solve, right?
Oh, that's so true.
There's the mess is part of our growth potential. Without it, we would all just be very bored, in my opinion.
Yeah, and stagnant. It sounds, that's a great point. Fantastic point. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
it's an opportunity as well.
Yes, absolutely. And
sure.
If it's overwhelming, and it can be big, it can be too much. It's all about like the sweet spot. Anyway. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, for engaging with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Linda. This has really been fun. And like you said, a rich conversation, and I appreciate your perspective I think it's so important that we really think about and support direct reports and people who are on those front lines of companies doing really important work.
Right. And I like to acknowledge that there are a lot of roles and organizations that don't have the same kind of upward trajectory or career path.
Yeah.
That, like we often are thinking of these people that are kind of in the middle, the strategy people. I don't know, the people who are like, actually, this is hard to delineate, but the functional groups are the groups that sometimes don't have the same types of paths for growth. And they probably need skills more than a lot of us do. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, Andrea. There you have it. Episode 15 is in the books. I wanted to repeat a couple of key ideas from the episode and also bring some additional thoughts here and there. I love how Andrea shared that she didn't have to be right about everything in order to be valued and accepted. And I think that's something to think about, that you can share your point of view and that it doesn't necessarily have to be the right thing, but it's separated from your value. There's also the idea that most people want belonging and they want impact. I would argue that everyone wants that at a fundamental level, but something may have happened in their lives completely outside of work that keeps them from engaging and being open to relationships that might actually foster belonging and impact. Andrea also shared that being heard is about being part of the conversation that leads to the outcome. This reminds me of something I heard a couple of years ago or more, this theme of an idea that leads to an idea, that like when you're brainstorming with a group, when you're collaborating about something and you're just trying to get ideas flowing, that you could offer something as an idea that leads to an idea, or set up the initial parts of the conversation to say we're going to be open to everything because, again, there could be some nub of an idea that leads to some other idea. Being heard is about being part of a conversation that leads to an outcome, and it might not always feel like a direct hit, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't part of the outcome. I also like this theme of healthy influence is mutual influence, and this idea to reflect upon, do you want the other person to have a voice of influence? Think about that. Are there people in your environment that you actually feel some restriction around in terms of wanting their voice to be heard? Andrea shares her amazing nuggets around being safe, being respected, and being believed in. She said, with being safe, I am for you. Being significant, I respect you, and being challenged, I believe in you. And this is what she was describing is ideal for a leader to foster in a relationship with direct reports. And everything that I'm doing with the Work Dope podcast, I'm attempting to bring themes that we apply usually specifically to leaders, but this idea around self-leadership, everyone is their own advocate. Everyone is their own leader. And if you are leading yourself first, you're more likely to have a successful experience in the workplace. So this idea around safety in your coworkers, your team members, your peers, do you allow them to feel safe? Are you for these people? Are you for your peers? Significance, do you respect your peers? Do you respect your boss? Do you respect your direct reports? And with challenge, do you believe in your peers? Do you believe in your direct reports? Do you believe in your bosses? This is complicated. In another episode, when I was talking with Jerry and Christy, we talked about walking in compassion. And this was around the idea of we don't necessarily like everyone in the workplace. They could be someone on our team that we just kind of rub up against in a way that doesn't feel good, that makes the relationship difficult. And do you really respect these people? Are you really for them? Do you want them to succeed? Do you really believe in them? I think sometimes we have to back up, and human to human, I would hope that we all at a fundamental level want other humans to succeed and to realize their potential too. Something that Christy had mentioned in that episode was that everyone can be a little bit nice up close. She was quoting something that Brene Brown says, that there is a human inside there somewhere, even if we're not seeing it. There could be a lot of self-esteem issues. There could just be other things going on with individuals personally that make it really difficult to respect them and feel like you're for them and feel like you believe in them. But these are fundamental concepts to be thinking about living and walking in order to have it reflected back to you. That the best way to have any of these positive attributes shined back at you is to shine them out, because people will resonate with that if they're also living in that vibration, if you will. Something that Nancy Roberts, who is going to be coming up in an upcoming episode, says, if it triggers me, it's about me. So if someone in your team or your boss or your direct report, if someone rubs up against you and you really feel like this relationship is challenged, know that that trigger is about you and that you have to take some ownership in what's going on there. If you are feeling around that idea of safety, am I for you? Can you back it up a little bit and understand that maybe you're for the outcome? Maybe you're for whatever the team is trying to do. And if at first you can focus on the goals of the team, the outcomes of the team, maybe that makes it a little bit easier. I hope that you are doing well in your work and in your life and seeking to up-level the experience of humans in your environment and for you yourself, shoring yourself up and living your values with integrity, even when things feel like a shit show. As always, please send me any comments, messages. You can send me a note or recorded message to linda@workdopepod.com. That's Linda at WORKDOPEPOD.com. Until next time, this is Linda Stacy signing off for Work Dope. Bye-bye.